page. And you are here tonight as part of a novel idea. This program is Hearing in Color, and this is our community-wide reading event. So we are recording tonight's presentation, and we have tonight with us a brilliant presenter. Our presenter tonight is Chris Thomas. He is composer for film, television, and theme parks, and a TEDx speaker. He has won the Hollywood Music and Media Award, the Palm Beach International Music Award, the Gold Medal Prize at the Park City Film Musical Festival, and Best Film and TV Music Award at eWorld Music Awards. Chris has written music for several Emmy-nominated films and for Woman Rebel, which was shortlisted for an Academy Award. In television, he works as a composer, orchestrator, and conductor for networks such as ABC, Fox, CBS, HBO, and so much more. More information on Chris can be found at christhomasmusic.com. Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are happy to have you here.
Well, it's nice to be here with you.
I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you to bring us into the world of synesthesia and hearing in color.
Wonderful. Well, let's see if I can successfully navigate Zoom here and share my screen with everybody. All right, it looks like we're in. That's good. To adjust my screen. Great. Well, this is my presentation on hearing in color. My name again is Chris, and I am a synesthete. I was born with a strange condition known as synesthesia. And I guess one thing I should preface here is, I'm not a medical professional. I don't exactly have like true medically trained knowledge on how to advise you if you have synesthesia or have more particular medical questions, even though I'm going to try to talk a little bit about how it works in the brain to some extent. But I thought I would just walk us through what this condition is. So first, a little more about myself. As you just heard, I work in film and TV music in a number of capacities. I also spend a lot of time working with the theme park industry and immersive entertainment world. And I also publish a lot of concert music, meaning music to be performed on stage with live orchestras, string groups, choirs, and the like. I've also been a TED speaker, and a common question I've been getting in recent months is, what have I been doing with myself over the pandemic? My pandemic project has been shooting a masterclass on film scoring, and so that'll be coming out at some point in the next few months. So back to our topic, synesthesia. What is it? Well, to start somewhere more tangible, we're all familiar with our basic sensory modalities, meaning just the basic senses you use every day. For example, you can hear things, you can see, you can taste, you can touch, and although it's not always wrapped into, it's not always considered the same thing as taste or touch, but feelings and emotions are highly related, and they're going to be a little more relevant later on in my presentation. And when you have the absence of all of these sensory modalities, you have what's called anesthesia, no sense whatsoever. On the other extreme, synesthesia is when you have multiple, either two or more sensory modalities all mixed together into one thing, where you can experience one sense and it provokes an involuntary second sensory response. And so Psychology Today, I think, gave me my favorite definition of explaining, or my favorite definition of synesthesia. Their explanation's pretty good here. I'll just read that. It says, synesthesia is a neurological condition, and we'll get back to that part. Neurological condition is a very particular, applies very much to this. Neurological condition in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway, like hearing, leads to automatic involuntary experiences in a second sensory or cognitive pathway, like vision. Simply put, when one sense is activated, another unrelated sense is activated at the same time. So a little more about synesthesia. it's very rare. It's thought that maybe somewhere between 3 to 5% of people have it. It's also said that possibly up to like 22% of people have it in some form, but the very like loud and noticeable versions of it tend to be a little more rare. It's thought that it's slightly more common in children, and it's known to be even more common among multilingual individuals, meaning if you speak several languages, you're just more prone to experience something like synesthesia. It was once thought that women experienced more synesthesia-like effects than men, but in recent years, it seems that that's pretty much equal across gender. Some have asked if you can develop synesthesia later in life, also known as acquired synesthesia. That can happen. It's extremely rare, and it's almost always associated with either an emotionally traumatic event or like a medical, physically traumatic event, like you have a brain injury or a stroke or something very disruptive to your mind. And synesthesia may be a side effect. In fact, there are some artists out there that I'm actually really big fans of who have acquired synesthesia kind of in their late 20s and into their 30s because of traumatic injuries. And it's also thought that synesthesia is related to the development on an evolutionary scale, the development of memory and creativity. And back to that part about it being a neurological condition and not disorder, synesthesia isn't a disability or an impairment of any kind. It doesn't mean it's a hindrance in your life in any way, even though it can be a distraction. It's just more of a funny condition that just, for people like me, when I hear something, I see color. Just two sensory pathways got bundled together for no particular reason. And some people wonder, well, it's hard to imagine what synesthesia feels like. What is it like to be one of us? Well, it's not something that is intangible to imagine. I think that there's several things here that neurologists have explained that are very close to what synesthesia feels like. And in fact, I think that it's true that we all do experience forms of synesthesia. It's like one of them would be that I didn't list here would be the phenomena of perfect pitch, something that a lot of synesthetes have. It's something I have where I can, you can play a note on a piano and I could be across the room and I can hear exactly what pitch you're playing and name it. People think that's a rather remarkable sort of thing, except for the fact I've noticed or I've even observed people experience it without realizing it, where it's like that way when you get to know a playlist really well in your car, and when one song ends, you can already hear the exact music in the key, even the exact starting pitch of the next song. I've even caught people singing along in advance of a next song right on key. So it's not like it's impossibly hard to relate to. I've also been told that we use not just our hearing when we listen to other people speak, but we actually rely quite a bit on lip reading to extract details and meaning and subtext when people speak. So, and so what that implies is that it's not only what we're hearing, but we actually rely quite a bit on what we're seeing to understand different levels of what people are saying. And for me, a very personal one are movies and soundtracks. And I feel like part of my day job is conjuring up a form of synesthesia for audiences, meaning that when you watch a film, you're not only reacting to what you see on screen and what you hear from the dialogue. Those are story elements that will impact you and move you. But when you add music into film, it provokes a whole different set of emotional senses. And if you pair the right sort of emotional provocation from music with exactly what the director's going for in the subtext of what's going on for what you're seeing, both senses put together create a completely new and fresh emotional, like sensory response. So technically speaking, it is a form of synesthesia. What you're seeing, hearing provokes something highly emotional that's very unrelated. And it wouldn't be possible without the two things together. And ASMR is another version that you can just go experience as soon as this talk is over. If you're not familiar with ASMR, it's this really popular thing that people listen to by the billions online, where it's like somebody talks very close to the microphone in a whispery voice or crinkles bags really close to the mic, and it sounds like it's right in your ears. And most people who listen to ASMR all describe the same physical sensation. They hear that crinkly up close in your ears sound, and we all experience this tingling down our neck, and it can go down to your back or your shoulders, but most people experience that very particular form of tingling. Now, it's not something I'm a big fan of. For me, ASMR has all the charm of a creepy stalker sneaking up and breathing down your neck, but it is very much a form of synesthesia. And so what this suggests is that synesthesia is probably something of an evolutionary neutral phenomena. It's simply something that's already a natural extension of our neurological makeup. Some of us just have slightly different sensory entanglements than others. So why synesthesia? Well, let's take a trip to the back of our brains. That little area lit up in the back is called the visual cortex. And within the visual cortex, there's this region known as the V4, which apparently is the color processing zone, where you can look, as you look around you and take in different objects in the space you're in, as your brain receives the image, this is the region that sorts and processes the color that you see. And for most people, seeing something will simply just activate your sense of what the colors are around you. But for some of us, if you're like me, it simultaneously activates sound, and sound simultaneously activates my color sensory response. So for me, sound and color are one and the same. One does not exist without the other. And so that's, my particular form of synesthesia. And that points to what's called the hyperconnectivity model. And what this means is there's this idea that synesthesia is probably passed on through genetics, and synesthetes are known to have thicker gray matter in the brain, and something called hypermyelination, meaning there's this like little fatty coating, or the myelin sheath that coats basically the lanes of information in your brain. And what it means is that it can stuff tends to process quicker back and forth. That doesn't mean we're smarter or sharper. Certain things just happen to move at higher speed between some regions. And so it's thought that this hyperconnectivity thing may have something to do with how synesthesia works in our brains. Now, to the evolutionary side of things, it's thought that evolution must play a role in this, or else it's a phenomenon that probably wouldn't still be carrying on to us to this day. It's thought to be part of why our extraordinary sense for creativity developed. In fact, synesthesia is found 7 times more in artists. And it's not that synesthetes are just naturally more artistic. I think the idea is more that we tend to be drawn to the arts because it's a world that makes sense. And, when we're dealing in colors and textures and sound and color and texture, or in my case, it's just a very comfortable place to be, to work with and interact, and not feel like this thing that lives in my head all the time is a constant distraction. When I'm working with music, it's a very colorful and rich experience, and I want to live in that space as much as possible, because when I'm not doing music, synesthesia is just a constant stream of noise that I'm just trying to filter out most of the time. It's also thought to be a part of the development in our expansive memories. Obviously, humans have very complex and expansive memory. It's thought that synesthesia must have played a role, or something like synesthesia helped this process develop with us. And I once heard from a neurologist that it's like a form. Synesthesia is like a form of memory enhancing color coding, meaning whatever information we're taking in, we can apply various forms of essentially just color coding. It's like putting different multicolored sticky notes on different types of information and logging them in different parts of our brain. I was also told that it's like if you have a coat to hang up, it's like you have 5 extra hooks to place that coat. And so you just have many more channels working all at once to hold on to a thought or a memory or a way to differentiate between objects and colors and things out in the wild, for instance. And why would that be important? Well, look at this picture here. Are we looking at elderberry or water hemlock? Well, you may want to carefully diagnose the difference between the two. They're almost impossible to tell apart unless you have a very, very sharp sense of what the color coding and the color variations look like. And so you would think that synesthesia or some form of it in our early development must have had something to do with our survival. Those of us who were particularly good at separating out small distinctions between colors and textures in objects like food or elderberry or water hemlock get to pass our genes on to the next generation. It would be a very useful trait to carry with you through your evolution. So now on to different types of synesthesia. There's not just one. In fact, there are many different kinds of known synesthesia in existence. And I'm going to go through these in the order of prevalence. And there are two most common forms of synesthesia. The first of which is called grapheme color synesthesia, which is also known as numbers and letters synesthesia. And this is when people have very specific color relationship to letters or numbers. And I've met quite a few of these. This is definitely the most frequent type of synesthesia out there, where people experience the number 1 or the number 3, or maybe letters of the alphabet in very transcendent and very just very bold ways. And there's all sorts of accounts of people who can memorize extraordinary lengths of the number pi, and they experience it through a color-coded system, and they can remember numbers on the orders of thousands in a row. And they credit this strange phenomenon that they have a color coding system that was automatically attached to the sequence of numbers. And that's how they memorized it. So again, maybe this is an artifact of our memory development process. And now a little bit into my own brain. This is maybe the second most common form of synesthesia, known as chromesthesia, also called sound and color synesthesia. And this occurs when sounds can trigger somebody to see colors. For instance, if you play a note on the piano, for me, whatever that pitch is, it has a very specific and very interesting shaped and textured color attached to it. And this is again a relatively common type. Now, on the less common category are these here, but I thought I would include them because I think these are by far the most interesting ones. And it's too bad that they're a little rare, because I would love to meet more people with these. But here's one we can all identify with. So auditory tactile synesthesia. This occurs when a sound prompts a bodily sensation. And I've met people who've described hearing certain kinds of sounds, something like a wind in the grass feels like water droplets on their arm. Or if we're listening to those ASMR videos and it triggers that inevitable spine tingling sense of somebody breathing down your neck, that's very much a good comparison to what this form of synesthesia might feel like. And here's one I'm glad I don't have. It's not terribly unpleasant for everybody, but it's known to have its unpleasant aspects. And that would be lexical gustatory synesthesia. And this is the taste synesthesia, where a certain color or a sound triggers a very distinctive taste. A few years back, I was listening to a radio show where they had a synesthete on the show, and she had this particular type of synesthesia. And she repeated the name of the host and described the experience of speaking his name as tasting like a tortilla chip with meat on it. And so that doesn't sound like a terrible taste experience, but I also knew somebody or met somebody who described the most incredible sense of delicious blue when he would make this type of like a stovetop kind of, cooked chicken, and would put orange juice on it and vanilla ice cream, and that particular color taste combination created just the most transcendent form of blue. And it was just this glorious experience to have that particular dish. So that would be a form of lexical gustatory synesthesia. Mere touch synesthesia is a form that it's also called a supercharged form of empathy, where you could almost take on emotion for emotion what somebody else is feeling, or the physical experience somebody else is experiencing, which seems like a very fascinating but kind of a scary form of synesthesia to take on, absorbing everybody else's pain and feelings around you. But I imagine that they're also absorbing a remarkable new layers of joy that not just coming from themselves but from their environment. So that might also be pretty interesting. And this last one I think is the most fascinating of all. It's called an ordinal linguistic personification, where things like sequences or days of the week, it could be numbers or letters as well, but it's a form of synesthesia where you experience certain items or line items as having distinctly different personalities. So days of the week, today is a Thursday, it may feel like a very friendly blue or purple day or something like that. And I think of the artist Kandinsky, who's now known to be a synesthete, who had very powerful color personality associations with color. I remember once hearing that he described a certain textured shade of yellow as having the personality of something like a friendly pasture cow. And he had this very powerful connection to that sense and that creature. So those are different types of synesthesias. Now on to range of experiences. So synesthetes can experience this from very moderate or even very, very light to very strong. Sometimes the experience can be so strong that it's even greater than this initial stimuli, meaning that every now and again, for instance, with me, I can hear a pitch, but depending on the colors and the qualities or what produced that pitch, it can trigger a swirl of sensations and color and all kinds of other additional things that are much more powerful and interesting than the source of the sound itself. And these experiences range from being sometimes very extraordinarily pleasant and interesting to incredibly unpleasant, to combinations of colors and textures and feelings that I would just rather have nothing to do with. And a lot of the time it can be very distracting, when you're just trying to pay attention to something else, but the environment around you is screaming sound because of the particular colors nearby. It can be very distracting doing just about anything if you're tuning into what's going on around you. And it can be very conversationally awkward. Until very recently, there wasn't exactly a language for synesthesia. In the past 20 years, I've been able to talk to people more about perfect pitch than I have synesthesia. The fact that I have this interesting party trick where you could blindfold me and hold down big handfuls of notes on the piano, and I could tell you what all of them are. That's fun and that's interesting. But as soon as I admit to somebody their speaking voice is full of oranges, greens, and dark reds, then it's more like there's the accusation of witchcraft or insanity thrown back at you. And people weren't really sure what to make of that. And it led to a lot of really awkward and uncomfortable social situations, having to kind of walk my way back out of the conversation. And on to my next point. So yeah, back to the party trick thing. Synesthesia or having synesthesia or perfect pitch or this sort of musical memory is not the same as being a genius. Beethoven was a genius. J.S. Bach was a genius. I'm pretty sure I'm not a genius. I would have known by now if that were the case. Synesthesia is just an involuntary, uncontrollable thing that's very artistically interesting, but it does not make you smarter than anybody else. It's just essentially, I think it's fair to just call it a party trick at best. And so this leads me to another area of distinctions. In recent years, at least in Psychology Today, in recent articles, they've been starting to recognize what's called association synesthesia. Now, this is something that is a little bit different than my case in that you can develop, sometimes not by choice, but just due to constant exposure to maybe you are very artistic and you work in a number of mediums, one of them being painting, another one being music. And as you're working in something with a lot of blues, and then you're working with music around the key of D major, let's say, D and blue may just start to develop and become interlinked together. And you've just been making this association through experience. And often people with associative synesthesia almost always describe it as very pleasant and colorful and fun. And are we still together?
Hi, Chris. We can still hear you. I don't know what happened to your video.
Oh, here, thank you for jumping in there. I'm going to switch to the other camera. Sorry, everything just disappeared.
There you go. We got you.
Are we back? Wonderful. Cool. Well, let's continue onward. So associative synesthesia. So based on what I was just describing, that means it's also interactive, and the results tend to shift and fluctuate. So D may be associated with blue for a period, but eventually it may morph into pink or orange, depending on what you are currently or over time associating with it. And I guess that's what, I took this little quote from the same article. Associated synesthesia is generally less intense and disruptive than having different sensory combinations projected into reality. And that word projected is what I've taken into this next part. I don't think there is a term for this distinction, but I call what I have projection synesthesia, meaning I didn't have a choice. It is projected against my will. It is involuntary and automatic. Despite my best efforts, I cannot turn it off. It simply overwhelms my senses and gets the best of me. It's non-interactive and I cannot change the results. The colors that I hear for every different pitch, no matter what I try to do to change or reassociate them, they absolutely won't budge. And I would say, for those of us who were kind of discovered in the early years of when synesthesia was becoming a known thing, we tend to describe our version of this as being born a prisoner into this world of sensory bombardment. It's this constant stream of noise and color that we just cannot turn off no matter what we do. And we simply have to learn to live alongside of it. So, do you have synesthesia? Well, I would say possibly. I mean, it's rare, it's not likely, but you might. And so similar to perfect pitch, the test is kind of the same. It has to be consistent over time, meaning 1 year you start with an involuntary bombardment of certain colors. In my case, for example, that go with certain pitches, or maybe you have the same yellow as Kandinsky's cow, and years later it's still involuntarily projecting as the same thing, and it has to be consistent across conditions. So it doesn't matter what. For instance, like when I was being tested for all the perfect pitch stuff, they would call me up and run perfect pitch tests on me really early in the morning. I'd have to get up like at 6 a.m. and take a call from someone in New York to try it then. Then they would call me at night, middle of the day. They'd wait a few weeks. They'd call me again, run another battery of pitch ID tests, and made sure that it was consistent no matter what the condition was. Being that I guess if you're tested first thing in the morning, you roll right out of bed, get on the phone, you have no pitches in your head. You haven't plunked around on a piano and developed a baseline for where A is, right? And so then you can't just figure out by using steps up the keyboard in your head to kind of sound out where the next pitches are. It has to be spontaneous and generated out of nowhere. And there's all these online tests for synesthesia, and I've taken them, and guess what? I have failed every last one of them. There's a lot of the online tests assume that if you have one form of synesthesia, you have them all. So every time I identified a pitch and the color was always the same, it would test me to see if I would also associate colors with letters and numbers, which I don't. And the fact that I don't also have letter and number synesthesia meant I only got 1/3 of the test right. So And another fascinating thing is that the effects and the loudness of synesthesia tends to decrease with time. And seeing as I'm 39 right now, I remember when I was 35, I noticed a really steep difference in how loud and distracting things were. It got a little easier to deal with. And I'm told that with time, it mellows a little bit more, which is something I'm looking forward to, actually. A little more about my syneth story. Now that I'm talking to a literary crowd, I believe it's a bit of a stretch to make that term work, but all the same, here it goes. So, back to the point about synesthesia being generally much louder early in life, that was definitely the case for me. I was a very hyperactively creative kid. Synesthesia was very loud, very vivid, much more so than now when I was younger. And I tended to suffer a lot of what some of us call sonic nightmares, where you wake up with just screaming walls of noise in your head, and it often lasts after you wake up. We are awake, and it's almost like you have a room full of stadium speakers surrounding your head, just projecting indistinct noise at you, and it usually tunes out around 15 minutes later. It's a weird side effect for some of us synesthetes, and luckily that wore off with time, and I haven't had one of those in years. And it was just highly distracting. Everyone thought I must have had ADHD or some learning disability in school. I had an awful time paying attention in class, but no one was ever able to diagnose what my problem was. When they thought it was one thing, I had the one symptom of maybe not being able to pay attention well enough, but I, didn't meet any criteria for any other sort of learning disability or attention disorder. And so no one was ever able to figure out what was wrong with me until much later. And I distinctly remember this moment when I was a kid, when I was at a parade where I grew up in Pendleton around the Roundup season. And I noticed a set of horns honking in the distance. And I distinctly remember realizing that I'm hearing an E flat and a B flat in my head. And I know, because I know that cloudy yellow of the E flat, and I know that dark, richly textured kind of blackish brown from B flat. And I realized I could be standing there in a crowd on the street hearing this, and suddenly I remembered, oh wow, I'm hearing the key of E flat out in the wild, and I knew it for a fact. And that was interesting because I realized, oh, I can recall pitches out of midair. And so, when I got into my career as a film composer, I started traveling more. I realized that I could write music on airplanes, for instance. I don't need to sit at a piano and figure out what all the notes are that I'm hearing. Once I just open up my mind, I can just go right pencil to paper and begin to sketch out what I'm hearing. And I know exactly what they are. So synesthesia in that sense has been incredibly useful, especially in film, since you have to produce music so quickly. But finally, when I got to college, some of my teachers realized I had perfect pitch, but they noticed that some of my other features were interesting. I was sent to a researcher on campus who sent me to a doctor who had just learned about this new emerging condition called synesthesia, and all the list of issues I had as a kid, in school, something like the nightmares I was having, and my sense of pitch wasn't only pitch, but it was associated with textures and colors, and that was how I could recall very specific things. It was a very specific checklist that I was ticking all the marks on, and so I was sent to a researcher. Well, I was connected with a research company in New York who put me through some further testing and determined that it was what I had. And so a slightly deeper look here. As part of another project I'm also working on, this is my little synesthesia color board. And so if you can see here, all the keys of the piano, here's the chromatic scale from A sharp, B. So all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale are represented, and each of them correlates to the particular color. So these are just my approximations. I just went to Sherwin-Williams, got one of those little color swatch books and started trimming out the closest color that seemed to resonate with those notes, and drew this little map and then connected them to where the pitches sit on the chromatic scale. So this is my alien spaceship of my imagination. And let's see. Yeah, a little more about my personal sense of things is I experience sound as color and texture. It's not just that I see color, but it's a highly shaped and textured experience as well. And I didn't get to choose my colors. In fact, on this little chart here, I don't like most of the colors I have. They're not particularly, not all of them are very enjoyable. Some of them are, but most of them aren't that interesting to me. And in my case, my condition is one of the more intrusive and loud forms. I am definitely a prisoner inside my head when it comes to this. And that's why it was easy to find me in the early days of synesthesia becoming known as a thing. I was sort of in that first generation of people kind of coming out of the late 90s into the early 2000s where they were discovering, oh, there's a number of you out there. And you know, in my life, one of my worst nightmares is going to a public place like, you know, a restaurant or a pub, and then there's music playing, or even worse, a live musical group. If I'm trying to listen to somebody speak, it's nearly impossible to separate out just the bombardment of color and swirling, you know, visual and aural noise against somebody speaking. So it's really hard to separate through that and listen to what you're really trying to say to me. It's very embarrassing. I can lose track of conversations easily because all I can hear is the chord progressions and the music going by, pitch for pitch. And so I often opt for the quietest places possible to hang out with friends. Now let's use all of our ears together here. I'm going to take you a little deeper into what I hear. So, in fact, I'll let my cello help me with a little bit of this, just as a point of comparison. So for instance, I experience the color red as the pitch A, blue is D, that's where I got the D and blue thing earlier, green is G, and yellow is E. So for me, the note A produces a very rich red color. D is blue, green, yellow. So those were just notes from my cello. But, you know, to me, synesthesia is a little more evocative than that. That was just a straight tone. But in my head, it's full of more textured elements. And so I composed lots of little samples here that will that show us, and these are just approximations, of course, but a little more what the experience of hearing red is like. Or let's go to D. D is kind of an alluring sky blue to me. And so you can pair these together and create slightly larger sonorities. So we can take A that we just heard with E, and we can produce this texture together. So it's going to start with A, then E on top next. There's A and E. Now notice the difference between a straight tone and a tone with lots of layers and depth and different textures. There's some instruments playing a very straight, pure tone, some of them a shimmery tremolo, some of them doing, there's a little electronics, there's a big mix of things, but the point is it creates this multi-textured version of a sound, and that represents what I hear a little better. Here's another one. Here's green and blue put together. So green, blue. Or how about whoops. How about some darker ones? I'll just skip ahead to this one. Here's A flat plus E flat. So two darker colors. I experience A flat as this dark, menacing red, and E flat as like a cloudy, brownish, dark yellow. So here's A flat, E flat. And these happen to be color combinations that work nicely together. Not all of them sound so pleasant when put into order, but here's some that I find are relatively pleasant sonorities. So the key of D minor has a very purple sunsetty sky effect to me. And here's, a D minor chord consists of D, F, and A. If you were at a piano, you could play those three notes and you would produce D minor. And so to me, it's blue, orange, and red. And together that creates this kind of purpley, sunsetty set of colors. And so here's an approximation of what that sounds like. Here's another one. So to me, the key of G minor has a very earthy, foresty feel with G, B flat, and D, which is bright greenish plus a dark brown plus a sky blue. Together, it feels like nature to me. And here's another one I'm really fond of. A major is quite a light show in my head. The A and C sharp is a very fascinating pitch to me. It's this bright, crystalline, very mysterious shade to me. That plus yellow creates this really interesting texture area. So here's an A major chord. May have just sounded like an A major chord to you, but in my head, it was quite a light show. And when looking at a work of art, I do have these really vivid reactions to them. And so the next two artists I'm featuring here, so like Jack Coulter, are synesthetes as well. And whenever I look at their works, it's similar to Kandinsky. Whenever I see their works, I really hear what they're going for. I tend to have very vivid reactions to them. So, for instance, this particular shade in the Jack Coulter painting here has this sound to me. So to my senses, there's these heavy browns and blacks and really dense textures in there, but then there's this really distinctive form of white that comes through, which has the sound of C to me. So I'm hearing B flat F, and then the really dark parts of that B flat sound are kind of represented by the low end in that music. And it's also a little unstable. They don't all line up so well. So so the pitch wasn't really exactly in tune in that audio sample back there. But that was just how I perceive that sample. Melissa McCracken is a fantastic artist who paints pictures that are extremely provocative to my imagination. And I really wish I had more time to compose something proper for this, because I'm here more of a pointillistic popping noise in my head, but for time's sake, I had to represent all the activity because I see a lot of rhythm and motion in this one, not in addition to depth and just darks and brights and dimensions with the color, but it's almost like a flower exploded into colorful butterflies all over the screen here. And to me, it has a lot of the elements of D minor, which we have just listened to. I see the purples and the combinations of colors that create that purple sunsetty thing with some dark blues, which anchor us down to the key of D. But there's a few things that don't belong in the key of D here, which is the white through the center. That bright white is a radiant sound of a C, the pitch C to me, which doesn't quite belong in the key, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. And the yellows are very much like the pitch E to me. So it's like a big D minor chord with the white and the yellow just attached to it. So here's what I'm hearing in Melissa McCracken's piece. That's just some sort of approximation of what's going on through my chromesthesic adult brain when I look at a piece of art like this. Oh, look at that. Looks like we've come to the end of this portion of the presentation. So how about I kick this back over to our Q&A side and we'll have a little discussion about all this. So Paige, good to see you.
This was fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing with us. This was a lot of fun. There we go. All right.
Sorry.
So we'll dive into some questions. The reason we're here tonight is a part of a novel idea, our community reading event. And this year's book, The Other Americans, features a character named Nora. She is a jazz composer and she experienced synesthesia the same way that you do. She sees color when she hears music. Does your synesthesia play a role in how you compose or what you compose? You spoke earlier how the colors are unchangeable. So does that influence what you try to surround yourself with?
Yeah. Here, I'm just going to stick to this camera. Sorry, my visuals are a little janky tonight. So does it play a role in what I write? Early on, I'll say this, until very recently, I've begun to just admit to myself that I should stop fighting synesthesia. I've always avoided talking about it. It always just ended up in strangeness that people didn't quite understand. And it was just an awkward point of discussion. And in my music, I fought it just as much. I tried to avoid relying on it or really giving into it. But then there was a point when I just thought, why not? This is just what I am. And I think instead of resisting it, I just need to fall into it and just embrace this part of myself that's a little more authentic. And when I see something on screen that has a certain saturation of colors or those very bold, colorful or effervescent elements on screen, I just lean right in and grab those colors and turn them into sound. And I just make it a part of what I do. And I'm actually steering directions as a composer to really just be more of a synesthete composer from now on. So in recent years, I have taken that step.
That's great. I love it. Synesthete composer. So you spoke to us a little bit about kind of the moment that you recognized that you were hearing those horns in the parade. Do you recall the first few times that you told somebody that what you were experiencing? Who did you tell and how was it received?
I never told anybody about the colors and the textures, partly because I wasn't sure that everybody else didn't experience it too. Until high school, I thought everybody could hear a pitch and know exactly how to find it. For synesthetes, we never knew it was weird until we realized other people didn't relate to it. And so in high school, it was the first time I realized I had this other thing. When I heard the parade in E flat, that was my first like moment when I realized, oh, I know what those are, but I'd never spoken about it until I was in my freshman music theory class in high school. And the teacher was playing some notes on the piano and he was repeating what he had played up on the board, but he missed a pitch. And I noticed exactly what the pitch was that was left out. And he checked and he said, how did you know I played it? And that's not what I wrote. I said, I just have it locked in here and I could see it. And he was like, here. And I was sitting on the other side of the piano across from him. He said, hey, what's this note? And he started playing notes on the piano and I could name them directly. And whenever he would play a note, a flash, I'm like, I know that green, that was a G. I know that dark red, that's A flat. And then he said, hey, I think you have perfect pitch. And at that point, I just knew I had perfect pitch, but I didn't know that the way I was recalling them was also strange, that those colors were involuntary and they were giving the answer away first. So, yeah, but it wasn't until after college I even spoke at all about it.
Well, we're grateful that you did, because this is really, really interesting, and it just brings a whole new component to our community reading, that we have you in our community who can talk to us a little bit more in depth and such a personal level. So next question. So if you're facing another person and you hear a particular key, does the person turn that color, or is it the color in the background or the color in your head, etc.?
Yeah, it's like a sense projected from your head out at everything. So it's like when I just listened to when I could see the flashes as you were speaking, it's like everything in the environment. I know it's all in my head. It's not like I literally see it. It's just everything just flashes into that particular shade, just moment to moment. And it's just a series of just popping little phosphemes in the environment. And the environment, or the aura, is the best way I could describe it. It's a weird, ineffable sensation, but it's something like that.
Fantastic. An ineffable sensation. Love it. Are there experiences that are heightened for you because of your synesthesia, for better or for worse? I know you said that you avoid live music. Are there other things that you purposely seek out because it's more fun for you?
Yeah, I avoid situations that make it hard to enjoy what I'm there for. Like, I love going to live music if I'm just there to listen. Then I just love it washing over me. But if somebody wants to start talking, they don't have a shot at holding my attention at all. It would be like if somebody just took, you were trying to have a chat, then a theater tech kid rigged a bunch of lights right above you and was flashing them in your face like strobes. It would be a little hard to keep up. So I avoid those kinds of things. But I have noticed certain sounds produce these glorious, effervescent light shows. And they're just the most pleasant thing in my experience. And one of the biggest ones for me is the sound of a Balinese gamelan orchestra. And so that's why over the years, I've started to integrate Balinese musical like conventions into my writing. Now, these days, I just write the actual Balinese instruments into my composing. So like this, I have a member of the Gangsa family behind me here. That's from the Balinese orchestra. And the more of those, the better, because what it does, if you could see what I see, you would just want to just live and bathe in that sound. Yeah.
Wonderful. Have there been studies possibly connecting this synesthesia to being on the autism spectrum, or a higher number of autistics having this?
I don't know. That's a thought I've had for a long time, because when I was just hearing myself describe, my situation, it sure sounds like it's somewhere in the spectrum, but I've been told that that's not really, that it's has highly similar symptoms in some ways, but a completely different neurological situation, where autism itself can present a variety of challenges that are a little harder than what we face. Ours is just a really loud, distracting light show versus an impediment, that can set us back in one way or another.
And now that synesthesia in general, it sounds like, is more of a known phenomenon, perhaps more of those studies will start coming out.
Yeah, every year there's more and more information and better information. There's been a lot of corrective science in recent years, which is good. Because yeah, exactly. The conversation has happened, and now it's like cool. Like it's like, oh, it's hip to have it. And I remember when it wasn't. Like we were all afraid to speak, and we would find each other, but we were quiet about it. Yeah.
And have you connected with other people who have synesthesia, either the exact kind that you have or a different flavor, if you will? How has being with those people in that community, how has it changed this experience for you?
Oh, like finding any sort of community, you realize, oh, I'm not the only one who has these weird nightmares or has these funny, distracting issues. And those of us with more like chromesthesia with sound, we like to compare our color charts. And I have a composer friend in LA who, for her, F is this really vivid hot pink. And I'm really jealous because I don't have anything cool like a hot pink. I would give up my F any day to have that. And I've heard really fun textures and colors that I would switch out for. But mine is mostly pretty boring and just not colors when I see them in general that I enjoy, but they're the ones I'm stuck with. So
that's fantastic. Okay. Do people's voices evoke colors, such as when someone is talking to you?
Yeah. I hear every pitch. Everybody speaks every second. Every time a new syllable comes out, I hear exactly where it is on the piano. Yeah.
Wow, that must be one of those party tricks. People are like, okay, well, tell me what my voice sounds like. Don't do that. Don't do that, please. That would get old very quickly.
Yeah, because I don't want more of that. All I've ever wanted is to pause it for a minute, except for when I'm working with it. And then it's this way of going really deep with the music and the creative process. But outside of sitting there writing music or listening, I would really rather not have it. Honestly, I mean, in fact, I've been asked if I would trade it in, and I absolutely would. I would just gladly give it up. You don't need it to be a good artist. But it's compelled me to stay in the arts, where I'm safe.
Well, we're really grateful that you have stayed in the arts, and we're really grateful to you again for joining us tonight. Sure. I am going to just say one more huge thank you, of course, to everyone who's watching out there. A Novel Idea is made possible by our sponsors and by all of you. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you. Check out DeschutesLibrary.org to catch all of our other fun free programs surrounding this year's community read, The Other Americans. And join us May 2nd to hear author Layla Lalami live in conversation with our Bend creative, Jason Graham. That's it for tonight, everyone. We hope you have a great night, and we'll see you again soon. Chris, thank you so much. This is wonderful. We hope that we'll see you again very soon as well. Until then, take care. Have a great night.